Hello and welcome to What the F*** Just Happened Today, your essential guide to the daily shock and awe in national politics. I'm Joe Amditas. Let's get to it. It's Monday, November 16th, 2020. Welcome to day 1397. More than 1 in 400 Americans tested positive for the coronavirus last week. The United States surpassed 11 million reported cases on Sunday, 1 week after hitting the 10 million mark, and the number of COVID-19 deaths now stands at more than 246,000 Americans. The 7-day average of new daily cases is more than 140,000, with 49 out of 50 states trending upward. Meanwhile, governors and mayors are implementing new restrictions to slow the spread, with Chicago issuing a new stay-at-home advisory, Philadelphia announcing strict new rules, New Mexico going into a 2-week lockdown, North Dakota imposing a new mask mandate, New Jersey limiting gatherings, and California putting more than 94% of its population in its most restrictive reopening tier. Meanwhile, Trump has not attended a coronavirus task force meeting in at least 5 months. Since Election Day, Trump has reportedly ceased to actively manage the pandemic, which has killed at least 244,000 Americans. Since Election Day, Trump has reportedly ceased to actively manage the pandemic, which has killed at least 246,000 Americans, infected at least 10.9 million, and slowed the country's economy. Instead, Trump has repeatedly and falsely claimed that the election was rigged against him. Trump's coronavirus advisor, meanwhile, called on Michiganders to rise up against Governor Gretchen Whitmer's new COVID-19 restrictions. After Whitmer announced Sunday a 3-week pause on indoor dining, Dr. Scott Atlas tweeted, quote, "The only way this stops is if people rise up. You get what you accept," end quote. Whitmer denounced Atlas's call to action, saying it is incredibly reckless. Dr. Anthony Fauci added that he totally disagrees with Atlas. On a more positive note, the coronavirus vaccine candidates developed by Moderna is 94.5% effective, according to early findings from a 30,000 subject trial that is still underway. The news comes a week after a similar shot developed by Pfizer and BioNTech said their candidate was more than 90% effective in an interim analysis. The two companies say they could have enough vaccine for about 25 to 30 million people in the U.S. by December, with the first doses going to the highest risk groups. Moderna's vaccine was co-developed with Dr. Anthony Fauci's institute. Trump, seeking to take credit for the vaccine news, tweeted, quote, "For those great historians, please remember that these great discoveries, which will end the China plague, all took place on my watch," end quote. Joe Biden, meanwhile, called the vaccine news really encouraging, but warned that, quote, "more people may die," end quote, if the Trump administration does not cooperate and start the transition process. Quote, "We are going into a very dark winter," Biden said. "If we have to wait until January 20th to start that planning, it puts us behind over a month and a half," end quote. Dr. Anthony Fauci said it's obvious that the Trump administration's refusal to begin the presidential transition process is not good from a public health perspective and could stall the rollout of potential vaccines. "Of course it would be better if we could start working with Biden's team," Fauci said, adding that the virus is, quote, "not going to stop and call a timeout while things change. The virus is just going to keep going. The process is just going to keep going," end quote. On Twitter, Trump acknowledged that Biden won the presidential election, but then refused to concede. Quote, "He won because the election was rigged," Trump tweeted, but an hour later added, quote, "rigged election, we will win," end quote, followed by, quote, "He only won in the eyes of the fake news media. I concede nothing. We have a long way to go. This was a rigged election," end quote. Trump also continued to blame his loss on debunked conspiracy theories about the 2020 election in a series of posts that Twitter flagged for their disputed information. National Security Advisor Robert OBrien, on the other hand, promised a professional transition with the incoming Biden administration. Quote, "If the Biden-Harris ticket is determined to be the winner, and obviously things look that way now, we'll have a very professional transition with the National Security Council, no doubt about it," end quote. Trump continues to refuse to acknowledge the results of the November 3rd election, which he lost to Biden. He has falsely proclaimed several times on Twitter that, quote, "I won the election," end quote, or continued to complain about the process. Twitter has put warning labels on his tweets, noting that, quote, official sources have called this election differently, end quote. A growing number of top Republicans have urged Trump to start an orderly transition of power. Meanwhile, 16 federal prosecutors assigned to monitor the 2020 election said they had not seen evidence of any substantial fraud. The assistant U.S. attorneys urged Attorney General William Barr to rescind his directive allowing investigators to pursue allegations of vote tabulation irregularities before the results are certified, saying, quote, the policy change was not based in fact, end quote. Moving on, the Trump administration plans to auction off oil and gas drilling rights in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge in Alaska before Biden takes office. The Federal Register posted a call for nominations from the Bureau of Land Management relating to lease sales in about 1.5 million acres of the refuge along the coast of the Arctic Ocean. In a reversal of decades of protections, Trump and the Republican-controlled Congress in 2017 authorized potential oil and gas development inside the refuge. Biden has opposed drilling in the refuge, and any sales would be subject to review by the Biden administration. Meanwhile, Chad Wolf has not been serving lawfully as the acting Secretary of Homeland Security, and his suspension of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program is invalid, according to a ruling from a federal judge. In June, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Trump administration wrongly tried to shut down DACA protections, but Wolf nonetheless suspended DACA on July 28th. The Trump administration has renewed its efforts to get Wolf confirmed before Inauguration Day. Moving on, Trump is expected to order the Pentagon to reduce troop levels to 2,500 in Afghanistan and 2,500 in Iraq before Trump leaves office on January 20th. There are currently 4,500 U.S. troops in Afghanistan and 3,000 in Iraq. And finally, hate crimes in the United States rose to the highest level in more than a decade. The number of hate crime murders also hit a record high in 2019. White nationalist hate groups rose by 55% between 2017 and 2019. That's all for now. You can find the links and sources for all of these stories on the main website. And as always, visit whatthefjusthappenedtoday.com for the latest news and headlines. Until next time, I'm Joe Amditas.